The most vivid memory I have of my grandfather was Christmas time when I was a little boy, because it was pretty much a wonderland for me and my sister. I mean, we would arrive there and see this huge pile of presents under the tree for us, and he was so warm, and he was so much fun to be around, and it was one of the best times of my life. Unfortunately, as my sister and I got older, we saw less and less of my grandfather, and he became like this creepy guy that we didn't want to be around anymore. After my grandfather's death, I found a lot of old photographs and film reels that he had taken from the early 1930s through the 1950s. I thought someone should do something with this footage before it becomes meaningless. And I wanted to find out why my grandfather turned into this creepy guy. So I decided to interview my mother, my father, and my cousin Ambrose, who was a childhood friend of my dad's.
There is no one word that I can use to characterize my father. I'd have to say that he was a genius in some ways, and he was a man with a great deal of pride, and that was one of his downfalls. I would also have to say that he was way ahead of his time in a lot of ways, and he had ideas that were probably 20 or 30 years ahead of his time. On the other hand, he did some very bad things in his life, and in some ways he was a very evil man.
Several family members have said that the best thing that ever happened to my grandfather was when he met Stella Marino, his future wife. I wanted to know how they met, and it turns out my mother asked that same question to my grandfather.
When your grandfather was staying with us one night, I had told him that I would take him out to dinner, and on the way I said, well, tell me how you and Grandma met. And he said, well, we met at a dance, but she played hard to get.
You gotta kind of wonder why two people that really seem so different were attracted to each other. And I think that she genuinely loved him, and at once committed was committed for life, and that was it. She was very supportive of all of the things that he wanted to do. If he had a big affair to run where hundreds and hundreds of people would come for dinners and dancing and that kind of thing, he would run those things, and she would be right there helping him with the whole thing. But she still had her own career, she had her own space, and she had her own friends. And I believe that was one of the reasons why she was able to be such a counterbalance for him, to keep him more or less sane. I think my mother's influence on my father is illustrated in one place best. In his younger days, when he was in his 20s and 30s, he wanted to be an artist. And as you well know, to be an artist, you're going to starve. So what she did was she steered him towards a career in interior decorating, and by that I mean they set up a business, and she ran part of the business, and he did all of the artwork. And they were quite successful at it. At age 45 or so, he decided to give up interior decorating and became a chiropractor. He didn't even have a high school education at the time that he did it. He had to go actually get his high school diploma, an equivalency diploma. And he went through 4 years of college, opened up a chiropractic office. And this was now the mid-50s. And in the mid-50s, he was using nutritional therapy to help people get well. And that's the kind of thing that really didn't become popular until probably the 70s. That's one of the examples that I can give you of the kind of genius that he had.
When we were kids, I used to tell my cousin Bart what a great dad he had. because I was always staying out in Long Island on the weekends and sometimes a week at a time. And I used to tell Bart that, gee, that's great, you know, and he would say, well, you know, you don't know how it is. It's not as great as you think it is.
Growing up, when I was really young, I guess under 5 or so, I thought my dad was a great guy. And he was a great guy when I was that old. We used to do things together. He always had a fun thing to say. He always had stories to tell. He could come up with stories that were absolutely incredible. He would just regale you with stories. Up until the time I was about 5 years old, I really enjoyed being with my dad. There's some nifty stuff in here. This is kind of one of the things that this little picture right here, where there's a bunch of guys on a boat with my dad in the back. That's me right there. These are all friends of mine. It's my cousin Ambrose there. We'd go out in the boat and we'd play Frogman and Navy.
And I was always pissed off because all the bigger guys had knives and he gave me a first aid kit. Aboard the Donna Marie, Frogman, Captain Bart Sr., Alfred Bart Jr., John Ambrose, and Billy. Here's me with that freaking first aid kit and everybody had knives.
Everybody else had knives, right?
Yeah.
I don't even remember this stuff. Well, somewhere's around 5 or 6, something happened. And what happened was, in my mind, he changed. In reality, I don't think he changed. I think he was the same guy he always was. It's just that I was getting older. So I started to go to things that, as a child, as a 7 or 8-year-old kid, you don't want to be going to one of these big affairs, parental affairs.
Hey, how's it going?
It was incredibly boring, being the only child. And he would have me pose in front of the fireplace, making believe I was stoking the fire. All this crazy, silly stuff. And I started to not like being with my father very much at all. Well, he hadn't changed. He was the same guy. But it's just that I had changed, and I had become something else to him instead of just a son. I had become an asset.
He used to do some strange things. He was working on a refrigerator, and I don't think it was grounded. Something was wrong, but when you touch it, you got a shock. And he had the thing turned around and say, Ambrose, touch that. And I'd touch it, and I'd get a shock. And Bart, touch that. And then Bart would get a shock. And then, you know, I don't want to do it no more. He says, don't worry, you won't get a shock. Touch it. And sure enough, we got another shock. And, you know, stupid little kids, we believed them.
It's interesting that my mother also felt like she was being treated like an asset by my grandfather.
Bart and I were married in 1964 in San Diego, California. His parents said they would like to make us a post-wedding reception. We thought it would be a great idea. The catch was they would pay for the wedding reception out of our gifts, and since there would be so many gifts, we could keep the extra cash and checks and all material gifts like towels. Little did we know the kind of wedding reception he had planned. He had a stripper who was asked to stop her act about 1/3 through. When it came time to see what we made out of it, we signed most of the checks over to him. From our point of view, it proved that we were fools. From his point of view, he was able to show his friend how wonderful he was without them really knowing what a conniver he was.
I remember that different people used to see my father in different ways. Some of the people who were his patients, they almost had him as a godlike image. And on the other hand, people who knew him very well, friends of long standing, in a lot of ways, he just annoyed them because of his posturing and always needing to be right, always needing to be the guy who was the important one in the bunch. But if you were part of the family, he was definitely, he wanted to control you. Is I guess the biggest problem. He always wanted to be in control of everything. He wanted to control you. In fact, I think if I had to characterize it, I would say that ideally he thought that you should spend as much of your effort and time and energy thinking about how you can help him. That was his entire focus.